Welcome to Roll Credits, where movie lovers get the trivia they didn't know they needed. This podcast was created with help from AI tools, so double-check any quotes before you drop trivia at your next movie night. Today, we're diving into There Will Be Blood. Did you know the massive oil fire scene was so intense it destroyed the set and could be seen from miles away? That's the level of realism this film went for.
Yeah, it really is just a towering cinematic achievement. I mean, we are looking at a huge stack of incredibly rich sources today just to unpack how director Paul Thomas Anderson and star Daniel Day-Lewis built this thing.
Exactly. And for anyone who maybe hasn't seen it, our deep dive today follows Daniel Plainview, who is this silver prospector turned really ruthless oil man during the California oil boom.
Right. It's fundamentally a story about unimaginable wealth, but also, just total devastating isolation.
Yeah. So what is the mission for our deep dive today? Basically, we are going to figure out exactly how you create a masterpiece on this scale.
We're talking intense method acting, explosive practical effects, and honestly, the psychological warfare that went on both in front of and behind the camera.
It's so fascinating. But, the journey to the screen actually starts with a pretty massive pivot from the source material, right?
Oh, absolutely. So the film is loosely based on Upton Sinclair's 1926 novel, Oil.
Upton Sinclair, he was the famous muckraker.
Right, exactly. He was an investigative journalist who literally raked through the societal muck to expose corruption and terrible working conditions.
Right, right.
But his novel was essentially a 550-page socialist critique of capitalism. I mean, it was written specifically to educate the working class about how they were being exploited.
Wow, so it was basically a political manifesto.
Pretty much. But Paul Thomas Anderson didn't want to make a political sermon, so he took the first 150 pages of the book.
Just the first 150?
Yeah, just the beginning, which details the gritty, mechanical reality of the oil boom and the prospectors, and he essentially threw the remaining 400 pages away.
That is wild. I mean, the book has this whole naive son character as the main focus, learning about the evils of the world. But the movie is just a straight shot of Daniel Plainview's relentless, almost terrifying ambition.
Exactly. He used the historical setting to tell a deeply personal, remarkably dark character study instead.
And to bring Plainview to life, I mean, Daniel Day-Lewis didn't just read the script. From what the sources say, he basically archaeologically excavated the era.
He really did. He studied real-life figures, like Edward Doheny, who was a massive oil tycoon at the turn of the century. Doheny literally helped build Los Angeles from the muck of the oil fields.
But my favorite detail here is that Day-Lewis spent a huge amount of time just, reading sentimental letters written by real turn-of-the-century oil men.
Yeah, because he was looking for the emotional baseline of these men. By reading their personal letters, he wanted to understand the profound isolation.
The homesickness and all that.
Right, the longing those men felt out in the middle of nowhere. It wasn't just about greed, it was about the psychological toll of the frontier.
And the way he constructed Plainview's physical presence was just as deliberate, right? Like with the voice.
Oh, the voice is legendary. He didn't try to mimic any specific historical oil man. Instead, he spent hours listening to audio tapes of the legendary Hollywood director John Huston.
Wait, why John Huston specifically? Was it just like a cool-sounding voice?
No, it was all about the psychology behind the voice.
Yeah.
Huston had this incredible vigor to his language. It was this aristocratic, booming resonance that didn't ask for permission to speak.
Oh, wow. It just commanded the room.
Exactly. And when you watch the film, you can absolutely hear that unyielding cadence in Plainview's speeches. I mean, he speaks like a man who expects the earth itself to listen to him.
That is such a great way to put it. And then there was the wardrobe. The costume designer, Mark Bridges, noted that finding the right hat was crucial.
Yes, the hat was everything. Bridges gave Day-Lewis 3 options, and Day-Lewis took them home for days, genuinely living in them until he settled on the perfect one.
And he wore it constantly, right?
Yeah.
The sweat stains you see on the brim in the final film are completely real.
Entirely real. The hat became a sort of physical talisman that grounded him in the character.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because looking at all these pieces together, the dark mine shafts at the beginning of the film, his insatiable thirst for the earth's blood, the violent battle with a man of God, and his eventual retreat to a giant, empty castle. I mean, I can't help but see an original cinematic monster here.
Oh, that's a really interesting way to look at it.
Right. Daniel Plainview is essentially a capitalist vampire. He literally avoids the sunlight in the opening scenes, he drains the life out of the landscape, and he ends up completely isolated in his own Transylvania.
I love that analogy. It fits his terrifying dedication perfectly.
But speaking of his terrifying dedication, I have to ask you to verify a wild rumor from our sources. I heard Day-Lewis is so committed to his craft that he literally built a working oil rig in his backyard in Ireland to prepare. Is that actually true?
So Day-Lewis actually laughed that rumor off himself when an interviewer brought it up.
Really? So it's totally fake?
Yeah, he joked that building his own derrick wasn't a bad idea, but they were, quote, short on help at the time.
That is hilarious.
He's actually expressed a lot of frustration with how the media constantly focuses on these exaggerated tales of physical preparation. For him, the true heavy lifting happens entirely in his imagination.
Oh, so it's more of an internal process.
Exactly. He works closely with the subconscious to find the character internally, rather than relying on building physical props. However, his method of staying in character on set, like
Ugh.
refusing to break that persona for months at a time, is very real.
Yeah, and that suffocating intensity he brought wasn't just in his head, though. We have to talk about how that exact internal intensity bled into the real-world production and drastically altered the cast.
It really did.
Because from what the sources tell us, Day-Lewis's commitment to Plainview intimidated his co-stars to a severe degree.
The most glaring example of this is the massive casting shakeup that occurred halfway through the 60-day shoot.
Right, with the character of Eli Sunday?
Yeah, originally, the role of Eli Sunday, who is this charismatic, highly manipulative preacher in Plainview's primary foil, was played by an actor named Kel O'Neill.
But he didn't end up in the movie.
No. The tension on set was just palpable. The sheer, unrelenting intimidation radiating from Day-Lewis while he was in character was reportedly just too overwhelming. Eventually, O'Neill was let go from the production.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. If your acting is so intense that it literally drives your coworkers off the set, is that ultimate dedication to the art, or is it just creating a toxic work environment? It's a very fine line to walk.
That is the exact uncomfortable line this movie walks.
Yeah.
I mean, by modern production standards, having an actor so intimidating that it forces recasting is highly problematic.
Oh, yeah. HR would be having a field day today.
Absolutely. But from Paul Thomas Anderson's perspective as a director, that off-screen terror was a tool. He recognized the very real fear Day-Lewis was generating and weaponized it to fuel the on-screen panic we eventually see.
Because the pivot the production made is one of the great scramble stories in modern cinema. I am still in total amazement how they pulled it off.
It's honestly a miracle it worked.
I mean, put yourself in Paul Dano's shoes for a second.
Yeah.
You are already on set, but you're just playing the small role of Paul Sunday, the quiet brother who tips Plainview off about the oil.
Right.
Suddenly, with just 4 days' notice, the director asks you to take over the massive, incredibly demanding role of Eli Sunday. You have one single weekend to figure out how to go toe-to-toe with Daniel Day-Lewis, who hasn't broken character in a month.
It's terrifying. And Anderson simply decided on the fly to make the characters identical twins just to explain why they looked exactly alike.
That is so pragmatic. Just, you guys are twins now. Action.
Yeah. And Day-Lewis himself was deeply impressed by Dano's courage. He later noted that when Dano stepped onto the set that following Monday, he wasn't just reading lines. He was a recognizable, fully formed character.
Right.
That real-life, off-screen tension perfectly fueled their on-screen rivalry. The central thematic dynamic of the film is this brutal clash between relentless, unchecked capitalist greed embodied by Plainview and hypocritical, self-serving religion embodied by Eli.
Exactly. They are both vying to exploit the exact same community for their own gain. They are basically two sides of the same coin.
Completely.
They both recognize the fraudulence in each other from day one. Plainview knows Eli is a fake prophet using theatrics to get power, and Eli knows Plainview doesn't care at all about the town's prosperity.
And that mutual recognition of the other's grift makes their dynamic so electric. The friction you see on screen isn't just acting, you're watching two very real, opposing forces collide.
But Anderson made sure the physical environment they were colliding in was just as punishing as the psychological one, didn't he? They couldn't just fake this in a comfortable Hollywood backlot.
They absolutely couldn't. They initially wanted to shoot in California, considering it's fundamentally a California story,
Yeah.
but they couldn't find any untouched 1900s landscapes left.
Too many power lines and highways.
Exactly. The modern world had encroached too much. So they moved the entire production to the rugged, incredibly remote desert of Marfa, Texas.
And Anderson really leaned into that harshness with a very stripped-down storytelling approach. The film famously opens with an incredibly bold 15-minute sequence with almost zero dialogue.
It's a masterclass in visual storytelling.
It really is. It relies entirely on visuals, ambient sound, and Day-Lewis's physical performance to show Plainview's grueling, bone-breaking rise from a guy swinging a pickaxe in a silver mine to an oil man.
And to capture that authentic vintage look, the cinematographer, Robert Elswit, insisted on shooting on film using anamorphic lenses.
Right, and for those who might not know, anamorphic lenses essentially squeeze a super wide image onto standard 35mm film, which gives you those sweeping, epic, panoramic vistas of the desert.
Yeah, it creates that massive scale. And for certain scenes, like the sequence on the train with the infant, they actually utilized a modified lens from a 1910 Pathé camera.
Wait, really? A lens from 1910?
Yeah. They were literally letting the glass from the era bend the light. It created this vignette effect with a saturated, old-fashioned aesthetic that makes you feel like you're watching a moving photograph.
That is incredible, but the practical effect that absolutely blows my mind is the massive oil derrick fire we mentioned in the intro.
Oh, that was a monumental undertaking. They built a real, practical 80-foot wooden oil rig out in the desert.
And the fake crude oil shooting out of it. The special effects team reveal it was made of food-grade methyl cellulose mixed with black dye.
Right, which sounds highly technical, but
It's the exact same substance McDonald's uses to thicken their chocolate milkshakes.
it is.
It's such a bizarre detail, but it speaks to the logistical nightmare of a film like this.
Huh.
You have an 80-foot rig spraying milkshake thickener everywhere, and then you set it on fire.
And setting it on fire actually created one of the best pieces of Hollywood trivia of the decade.
Oh, the Coen brothers story.
Yes. The Coen brothers were filming No Country for Old Men in Marfa at the exact same time. In fact, they had sneakily booked up all the motel rooms in town, forcing Anderson's crew to scramble for lodging.
That's amazing.
So when Anderson's crew did a pyrotechnic test for that massive oil fire, it created a smoke cloud so huge and thick that it drifted right into the background of the Coen brothers shot, miles away.
No way.
Yeah, they were forced to shut down their production for an entire day just to let the smoke clear.
Okay, let's unpack the physics of this for a second. If you build an 80-foot wooden tower in the bone-dry Texas desert and you set it on fire with a literal mix of gasoline and diesel fuel, how on earth do you put it out safely before it burns down the whole state? You can't exactly just spray an 80-foot inferno with a garden hose.
It sounds impossible, but they actually used the historical method shown in the film itself. To extinguish the real fire, the special effects team rolled barrels of real dynamite right into the base of the flaming derrick.
Wait, you're throwing explosives into a fire to put it out? That sounds like adding gas to a match.
It sounds totally counterintuitive, but it's based on simple physics. I think fire needs oxygen to survive, right?
Right, of course.
When dynamite detonates, the blast wave violently pushes all the oxygen away from the source in just a fraction of a second. It creates a temporary vacuum.
Oh, wow.
Without oxygen, it literally starves the fire to death instantly. But they still only had one 80-foot rig, so they had to get all their coverage before it completely burned down or collapsed.
The pressure must have been insane.
And the heat from those flames was so intense, even from over 100 feet away, that the actors' grimaces you see on film aren't acting. They are genuine physical reactions to the blistering temperatures, literally melting the makeup off their faces.
The physical intensity of that blazing derrick and the harsh desert was incredible, but it was amplified by an equally intense, almost physical wall of sound. Which leads us to the film's unforgettable score.
Yes, the score is just iconic.
Originally, Anderson had a different, more traditional concept for the music, but he brilliantly pivoted and hired Johnny Greenwood, the lead guitarist for the experimental rock band Radiohead. What's crazy is that Greenwood had never scored a proper feature film before.
Your outsider perspective is exactly what made the score so groundbreaking. Greenwood's process was entirely unconventional for Hollywood.
How so?
Rather than sitting down in a studio and scoring scene by scene, matching music to specific actions on screen, he wrote hours and hours of music based purely on the story's themes and his feelings about the landscape.
So he just sent them a giant folder of music?
Basically, yeah. He would send these massive suites to Anderson, and Anderson would then edit the film to the music, spotting the tracks where they fit best.
And the music itself is so avant-garde and highly dissonant. He heavily utilized microtones.
Right, which are really unsettling.
Yeah, if you picture a piano, microtones are essentially the notes that exist in the cracks between the standard keys. When you play them, it creates this subconscious feeling in the listener that something is deeply sour or off. which perfectly mimics Plainview's decaying mind.
Pieces like Popcorn Superhet Receiver use these aggressive string clusters to literally sound like the violent bubbling of the crude oil under the earth.
It's brilliant. But despite being universally hailed as a masterpiece by critics, the score was actually disqualified from the Academy Awards for Best Original Score, right?
Yes, unfortunately.
Oh.
Greenwood had incorporated a few of his pre-existing compositions, like his work from a documentary called Body Song, along with classical works by Arvo Pärt and Brahms.
Ah, so it wasn't 100% original.
The Academy rules are very strict about the percentage of original music required, so he was shut out of the nominations entirely.
So what does this all mean for the viewer? It sounds like Greenwood didn't write a soundtrack for a movie. He wrote a heartbeat for the landscape. When you watch that fire scene, the percussion isn't just background noise. It feels like it's literally regulating your own pulse.
In film theory, this is often referred to as haptic or physical sound, because Greenwood's music is so deeply rooted in the physical action of playing the instruments. Like, you can vividly hear the aggressive, violent scraping of the bows on the strings. It bypasses your intellectual mind and directly attacks your body.
It really does force you to physically feel Plainview's internal decay.
Exactly. It forces the audience to feel the violent rupture of the earth. It is a completely embodied experience.
Yeah.
The music isn't just accompanying the film, it's the infected blood coursing through its veins.
And all of these elements, the unyielding method acting, the brutal physical environment, the dissonant haptic music, they all violently collide in the film's bizarre, unforgettable, and bloody finale.
The bowling alley scene.
Yes. The climax takes place years later in 1927. Plainview is now obscenely wealthy, but he is completely isolated. He's living in this cavernous mansion, and the final scene takes place in his massive private bowling alley.
And as a fun fact, they filmed this at the Greystone Mansion in Beverly Hills.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and that mansion was actually built by Edward Doheny, the very oil tycoon Plainview was based on.
The layers of historical resonance in that location are incredible, and it is in that bowling alley that we get the confrontation that gives us the most famous line of the film, screamed by Plainview at a now desperate Eli Sunday, "I drink your milkshake!"
It's so iconic. But Anderson didn't just invent that line out of nowhere.
Wait, really? You're telling me one of the most unhinged quoted movie lines of the 2000s isn't just a crazy piece of screenwriting?
Nope. The sources say Anderson lifted it directly from the transcripts of the 1920s Teapot Dome scandal.
Are you serious?
Completely. Senator Albert Fall literally used the milkshake analogy in a congressional testimony to explain the concept of oil drainage, the act of sucking oil from a neighboring property beneath the surface.
That is wild, a congressional hearing. But why a milkshake? How does that bizarre, almost childlike image fit into the climax of this incredibly dark, heavy drama?
It is terrifying, precisely because of how absurd and infantilizing it is. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the milkshake represents wealth, resources, and total dominance. Plainview is explaining to Eli that he has already drained all the oil from the land Eli is trying to sell him.
By drinking the milkshake.
Right. Plainview is proving his ultimate final victory over Eli. But he isn't treating Eli as a formidable opponent. He's treating him like a naive child whose candy he has just stolen in a sandbox. It shows that Plainview views people as playthings.
But the victory is entirely hollow. The original script actually had Plainview beating Eli to death with a silver tumbler, but it evolved on set to the even more visceral, brutal use of a wooden bowling pin.
Which is so much darker.
And when it's over, he just sits next to the body and says, "I'm finished." The line represents Plainview's ultimate consumption of everything around him. He drank everyone's milkshake, and now there is nothing left. He is completely alone in his empty mansion, devoid of family, friends, or rivals.
The film really forces you to witness the logical endpoint of that unchecked ambition. He conquered the earth, but he destroyed himself in the process.
Before closing, let's just think about this. We started by talking about that 80-foot pillar of fire in the desert. Plainview spent his entire life looking to strike oil, searching for that incredible heat and energy, but in the end, the landscape he left behind, both in the earth and in his own soul, was nothing but cold ash. If Daniel Plainview is the ultimate embodiment of 20th century capitalist ambition, what does his total isolation at the end say about the true cost of success? Does winning the game inherently mean you lose your humanity, or was the humanity already gone when the game began?
It really makes you wonder. I mean, by the time he's sitting in that bowling alley, there's just no humanity left to salvage.
And that wraps our deep dive into There Will Be Blood. If you enjoyed uncovering the story behind the story, follow Roll Credits and share it with your fellow film lovers. We'll be back soon with more trivia, more movie magic, and maybe a few more unforgettable performances. Stay curious.